Is Fire Emblem Engage designed in such a way where you're basically punished for evenly distributing XP? This is something that I've come to realize from doing low man runs. So ideally, when I did these runs, it would be a challenge, right? Like the idea was that it was going to be a harder than normal run. Like I did my 5-man run, I have a 7-man run that's currently doing really well. And the idea was to run fewer units to create pressure in terms of having fewer options, fewer things on the board. So the plan was to make the game harder, but what it actually did was it made it easier in a lot of ways, because I ended up with super units that weren't even tanks that could tank enemies, that could one round consistently, and that could perform at a high level. Now, one thing that I find when I go back to full teams where I kind of evenly distribute kills is that it's harder to create those types of units because you have so many resources in the game, even on like a DLC run, that kind of demand certain builds, certain resources, and all these units, even though you can level them up to similar levels, are still competing for engravings, they're competing for unique weapons, they're competing for SP books, for passives, they're competing for XP. So like when you have all these units competing for things, it waters down your entire team and actually makes the game harder. So it's kind of funny how that works, because you would think having more units would be better, but because of the way that resources and allocation of resources work in this game, you can kind of end up with like a bunch of subpar units that literally just make your life harder. Like, what would you rather have? A bunch of units that can barely one round or can situationally one round, or half of that many units that can consistently destroy everything you have them attack? For me, the answer is obvious. I want to destroy the game in front of me. I don't want to be messing around with these weak units that can't do anything, that kind of make me just sad. And, you know, depending on how you're playing the game, if you're doing like a challenge run or not, maybe you do want the extra challenge of running bad units. Honestly, I don't think it's worth it. I do think that now, this doesn't mean you can't run a full team, because there's other ways to make use of those extra deploy slots, but it does mean that you're not going to be having everything be a combat unit. At least that's what I think. I don't think you should have everything be a combat unit. I think it's better to have half your team be combat units and the other half be utilities. And utilities can also deal damage. So you could have a debuffer, for example. You could have like Thoron Draconic Hex units. So you could have 2 sages that all they do is just spam Thoron and put Draconic Hex and put chip damage on things. So that could be an example of a unit who has staff access, who can heal, who can obstruct, who can freeze, who can restore, and can also debuff and kill. And if you have 2 or 3 of these things attack a dude, 3 Thorons will kill an enemy, right? So they can still kill things. So there's different options for your team aside from just like trying to make damage carries. And honestly, you don't really want that many damage carries anyways, because then they just start stepping on each other's toes. In this particular run, I wanted to use the DLC units more. But before then, I had like a monster Chloe who's just benched right now. I have a monster Chloe and I also have a monster Tamara, who both are benched because like I understand how to build those units. Chloe snowballed early. I think I actually benched her because she's so powerful right now. Like she could probably one round this thing from full health. It's pretty silly. Having carries just makes your life easier. And essentially the game rewards you more for unit investment and team composition more so than raw player skill, because all the player skill in the world can't take a bad unit and make them one round. That's completely up to the stats of the unit. And that's kind of the underlying theme of this video, is overcalculation. So what is calculation? So calculation is when you are playing Fire Emblem and you are making moves and you are thinking about what you want to do. That is calculation. Now, what is overcalculation? Overcalculation is when a position is simple, but because your tools suck, it's complicated. And that's kind of like the premise of most challenge runs, where it's like, okay, I have limited access to units, limited access to like abilities or passives. Like people do the ringless run, so you have limited access, emblem rings, or they do a no Somniel run or no monastery run in the case of 3 houses. So you have limited access to other resources. And I've personally done like skip only run on 3 houses. And in the case of Engage, it would seem to be that the metagame is low carry count. So you have these powerful engage abilities like Bonded Shield, you have powerful emblems like Ike. Some people undervalue Ike. Ike on Tamara is insane, and Ike on Panette is insane. There's very much this notion of the combination of all these different things produces the result, right? So when we're analyzing what's good and why, and what's powerful and why, we have to think about the end result. So it doesn't matter that, you know, certain units will power level because you're feeding them more XP. The result is all that matters. If the result of power leveling units, and by power leveling units, I mean just having a few units get all the kills where other units support them, if the result is crazy powerful units that trivialize the game, then I would say you're playing the game correctly, because that's kind of what the game wants you to do in a way. It kind of wants you to min-max and break it. That's like the entire point. If the game was more concerned with just raw balance, they would change the function, like the functionality of things. They would change the mechanics. They might reduce complexity, but increase skill ceiling requirement to perform well. But in this game, unit building is like most of the battle. Unit building, army management, resource management. If you can do those things well, the game largely beats itself. And as long as you understand the basic builds, you can easily complete the game on Maddening. A lot of it's just knowledge. So just having knowledge of, okay, I only want like 5 to 6 hard carries, maybe 7. You could get away with 7. So like 5 to 7 hard carries, like damage dealers, and then the rest are utilities. And this game has some good utilities. It has Enchanter, it has Dancer, it has Chi Adept, it has Lucina Bonded Shield, it has Sages. Like Sages are utility units even. They can deal damage and also act as utilities, and in some cases, 1-round enemy armor or put substantial damage on them. And even if they're not hard carries, they can do this. So you can have like a lot of pretty relevant, viable units act as utility units, as well as have like your main force kill a ton of things. And the other thing too is like Bonded Shield is absolutely cracked. So like if you use Bonded Shield, like an Anna Mage Knight with Fram Bonded Shield, and Fram has the Micaiah engraving, she gets the dual support. Just the two of them can completely take an entire front for 4 turns and kill most, if not all of those things on Levin, Sword, or Bolgadone. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. I just want to talk about the opportunity costs, the level of investment it requires to get units online, having ineffective units, and why that can hurt you, and why it just produces positions that require more calculation than needed. And depending on how you want to play the game, that can be a good or a bad thing. If you're playing for a challenge, that can be a good thing. If you're just playing just to beat the game on Maddening, that can be a bad thing. It's all about your intentions and your goals, right? But yeah, that's it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe. Feel free to drop a comment as to what you think about the hard carry meta, or at least that's what I'm going to be calling it. And I'll see you in the next one.